Stories from Wisdom of the Idiots by Idris Shah.
Caravanserai. There was once a man named Mu'in who was swindled and betrayed in his youth by another man called Halim, an unusually greedy individual. Mu'in said to himself, "One day I shall be in a position to pay this man back. I shall become rich, and his envy will ruin him, especially if I deny him money." But the years passed, and Mu'in did not become rich. His lifetime's savings would only have kept a wealthy man for a month. When he was 40, he became ill, and physicians said that he had only a few weeks left to live. Now Mu'in had a Sufi preceptor, Daud, son of Zakaria, and he asked him what he might do. "To arouse envy is no part of a Sufi's work," said Daud, "for envy is a fatal rotting, which kills a man by its feeding, and it can be extirpated only with the greatest of difficulty. The only method, in fact, is for the afflicted one to practice intense and real generosity, and that he is rarely willing to do. I can tell you this, and I leave the rest to you. The envious corrode themselves by what they think is true, not by the real truth." Mu'in pondered these words deeply, and then he sent for his son Aram and said to him, "I have very little to leave you, but I believe that I can settle a debt and make provision for you by a judicious investment, if I do it now, so obey me in every detail. There is only a short span of life left to me." Aram, following his instructions to the letter, took all his father's savings and bought rich robes, some jewels, 2 beautiful houses, and much else. Then the father and son went to the most costly caravanserai near the villain's home, and called him to them. Mu'in, weakened by exertion, was lying in bed. When he saw Halim, he said, "I am probably on my deathbed, and you are the only person whom I know in this locality. I have a son, as you see, and to him I will impart a Sufi's secret, which produced all the things which you see as my possessions. Look after this boy Aram, and he will tell you the secret at the correctly auspicious moment which I have confided to him." Soon afterwards Mu'in died, and Halim, who was quite rich, lavished presents on the boy and did everything to impress his kindness upon him, greedy for the Sufi's secret. He remained ever attentive in case the opportune moment for the transmission of the secret should occur. But Mu'in had told Aram, "Reveal the words of the Sufi to Halim, if he has been generous enough to you, if you ever find that he is no longer greedy." So Aram watched Halim for years. Halim offered money, but never somehow gave as much as he offered. Aram took what was given, and he even asked for more, both directly and through intermediaries, to discover whether there was any reluctance on Halim's part. And he found a great deal of that. This process continued for several years. Halim suffered from fits of elation and depression, and started to interest himself in all kinds of diversions, such as gossip, to relieve the tensions of his life. And then one day he was reading a Sufi book which said, "To promise and not to fulfill prevents the transmission of Sufi secrets." And he suddenly remembered that he had not fulfilled all his promises to Aram. The same day he offered Aram the balance of the very large sum which he had originally said that he would donate to him. Aram said, "I am no judge of why you did this, but since it may be for the right reason, I will tell you the Sufi's secret now." And he told Halim what had passed between the Sufi and Mu'in. Now Halim, his greed overcome by his admiration for the wisdom of the Sufi, said, "Aram, I have no place in my heart for regret at the money which has been spent. Do just one thing for me. Tell me how to find this Sufi, that I may kiss his feet." This is the story told by Halim, the great Sufi sage, who eventually succeeded Sheikh Daud, son of Zakaria.
The Golden Fly. There was once a man called Salah, who knew right from wrong, and who knew what should be done and what should not be done, and who knew much of book learning. He knew so much, in fact, that he'd been appointed to be the personal assistant to the Mufti Zafrani, an eminent jurisconsult and judge. But Salah did not know everything, and even in the things he did know, he did not always act in accordance with his knowledge. One day, when he had set aside his glass of sweet juice, a tiny, shimmering golden fly settled on the rim and took a sip. Then the same thing happened the next day, and the next, until the fly grew in size and Salah could easily see him. But the fly had grown so slowly that Salah hardly noticed him at all. Finally, after several weeks, Salah had been deep in study of a knotty legal problem when he looked up and realized that the fly seemed much larger than it should be. He brushed it away. The fly at once rose into the air, circled the glass, and flew off. But it came back. When Salah's vigilance was relaxed, the fly would swoop down, sit on the rim of the glass, and drink as much as it could. As the days went by, the fly became larger and larger, and as it drank more and more, it also started to look different. First, Salah flicked it away. Then he found he had to take a stick to hit it with. Sometimes, too, the fly started to look to him like something with a semi-human form. It was, of course, a jinn, and not a fly at all. Finally, Salah shouted at the fly, and lo, it answered, saying, "I do not take so very much of your drink, and besides, I am beautiful, am I not?" Salah was first amazed, then afraid, and in the end completely confused. He started to derive some pleasure from the visits of the fly, even though it was drinking some of his sherbet. He watched as the fly danced. He thought about it a great deal. He did less and less work. And as the fly became larger, he found himself feeling weaker and weaker. Salah was often in trouble now with the Mufti, and so he pulled himself together and decided to make an end to the fly. Summoning up all his resolution, he hit it a violent blow, and it flew away, saying, "You have wronged me, for I only wanted to be your friend, but I shall go if that is what you want." Salah at first felt that he had got rid of the fly for good and all. He said to himself, "I have beaten it, and that proves that I am more powerful than it, be it man or jinn, fly or not." Then, when Salah had convinced himself that the whole matter was at an end, the fly appeared again. It had grown to an enormous size, and it descended from the ceiling like a shimmering lake in the form of a man. 2 huge hands reached out and grasped Salah's throat. When the Mufti came to look for his assistant, he was lying strangled on the floor. The side wall of the house had collapsed with the jinn's passing, and all that was there to mark his enormousness was a handprint on the whitewash, as large as the side of an elephant.
The Saint and the Sinner. There was once a dervish devotee who believed that it was his task to reproach those who did evil things and to enjoin upon them spiritual thoughts so that they might find the right path. What this dervish did not know, however, was that a teacher is not one who tells others to do things by acting through fixed principles. Unless the teacher knows exactly what the inner situation is with each student, the teacher may suffer the reverse of what he desires. However, this devotee one day found a man who gambled excessively and did not know how to cure the habit. The dervish took up position outside the man's house. Every time he left for the gambling house, the dervish placed a stone to mark each sin upon a pile which he was accumulating as a visible reminder of evil. Each time the other man went out, he felt guilty. Each time he came back, he saw yet another stone on the pile. And each time he put a stone on the pile, the devotee felt anger at the gambler and personal pleasure, which he called godliness, in having recorded his sin. This process continued for 20 years. Each time the gambler saw the devotee, he said to himself, "Would that I understand goodness, how that saintly man works for my redemption. Would that I could repent, let alone become like him, for he is sure of a place among the elect when the time of requital arrives." It so happened that, through a natural catastrophe, both men died at the same time. An angel came to take the soul of the gambler and said to him gently, "You are to come with me to paradise." "But," said the gambler, "how can that be? I am a sinner and must go to hell. Surely you are looking for the devotee who sat opposite my house and who has tried to reform me for 2 decades. "The devotee?" said the angel. "No, he has been taken to the lower regions, since he has to be roasted on a spit." "What justice is this?" shouted the gambler, forgetting his own situation. "You must have got the instructions reversed." "Not so," said the angel, "as I shall explain to you. It is thus wise. The devotee has been indulging himself for 20 years with feelings of superiority and merit. Now it is his turn to redress the balance. He really put those stones on that pile for himself, not for you." "And what about my reward? What have I earned?" asked the gambler. "You are to be rewarded, because every time you passed the dervish, you thought first of goodness and secondly of the dervish. It is goodness, not man, which is rewarding you for your fidelity."
The Fox's Proof. Once upon a time there was a fox who met a young rabbit in the woods. The rabbit said, "What are you?" The fox said, "I am a fox and I could eat you up if I wanted to." "How can you prove that you are a fox?" asked the rabbit. The fox didn't know what to say, because in the past rabbits had always run from him without any inquiry. Then the rabbit said, "If you can show me written proof that you are a fox, I'll believe you." So the fox trotted off to the lion, who gave him a certificate that he was a fox. When he got back to where the rabbit was waiting, the fox started to read out the document. It so pleased him that he dwelt over the paragraphs with lingering delight. Meanwhile, getting the gist of the message from the first few lines, the rabbit ran down a burrow and was never seen again. The fox went back to the lion's den, where he saw a deer talking to the lion. The deer was saying, "I want to see written proof that you are a lion." The lion said, "When I am not hungry, I don't need to bother. When I am hungry, you don't need anything in writing." The fox said to the lion, "Why didn't you tell me to do that when I asked for the certificate for the rabbit?" "My dear friend," said the lion, "you should have said that it was requested by a rabbit. I thought it must be for a stupid human being, from whom some of these idiotic animals have learned this pastime."
Hadean and the Wanderer. Hadean el-Shah, great teacher of the Naqshbandi dervishes, one day met a confrere in the great square of Bukhara. The newcomer was a wandering calendar of the Malamati, the blameworthy. Hadean was surrounded by disciples. "From where do you come?" he asked the traveller in the usual Sufi phrase. "I have no idea," said the other, grinning foolishly. Some of Hadean's disciples murmured their disapproval of this disrespect. "Where are you going?" persisted Hadean. "I do not know," shouted the dervish. "What is good?" By now a large crowd had gathered. "I don't know." "What is evil?" "I have no idea." "What is right?" "Whatever's good for me." "What is wrong?" "Whatever's bad for me." The crowd, irritated beyond its patience by this dervish, drove him away. He went off, striding purposefully in a direction which led nowhere, as far as anyone knew. "Fools," said Bahuddin Naqshband, "this man is acting the part of humanity. While you were despising him, he was deliberately demonstrating heedlessness, as each of you does, all unaware, every day of your lives."
The Woman Sufi and the Queen. A certain woman of the disgraced family of the Umayyah had become a Sufi, and she went to visit the queen of the household of al-Mahdi, who had replaced the Umayyah. The queen was herself known as a woman of delicacy and compassion. When she saw the emaciated and ragged figure of the pauper woman at her door, she asked her to come in and prepared to give words of comfort and such presents as would relieve her evident want. But no sooner had the woman said, "I am a daughter of the family of Umayyah," than the queen forgot all her charity and shouted, "A woman of the accursed Umayyah? You have come, no doubt, to beg for alms, forgetting what things your menfolk did to our family, how they oppressed them and treated them without mercy, leaving them no recourse except for God." "No," said the Umayyan princess, "I did not come for sympathy, forgiveness, or money. I came to see whether the family of al-Mahdi had learned to behave from their predecessors who could not, the ruthless sons of Umayyah, or whether the conduct you deplore was a contagion which would certainly end in the downfall of those who contract it." The Umayyan princess walked away and was not afterwards anywhere to be found. We have this story only from the words of the Queen of al-Mahdi, and so it may have been the cause of some improvement in human behaviour somewhere.
The Story of Hiravi. At the time of King Mahmud, the conqueror of Ghazna, there lived a young man by the name of Haydar Ali Jan. His father, Iskandar Khan, decided to obtain for him the patronage of the emperor, and he sent him to study spiritual matters under the greatest sages of the time. Haydar Ali, when he had mastered the repetitions and the exercises, when he knew the recitals and the bodily postures of the Sufi schools, was taken by his father into the presence of the emperor. "Mighty Mahmud," said Iskandar, "I have had this youth, my eldest and most intelligent son, especially trained in the ways of the Sufis, so that he might obtain a worthy position at your Majesty's court, knowing that you are the patron of learning of our epoch." Mahmud did not look up, but he merely said, "Bring him back in a year." Slightly disappointed, but nursing high hopes, Iskandar sent Ali to study the works of the great Sufis of the past, and to visit the shrines of the ancient masters in Baghdad, so that the intervening time would not be wasted. When he brought the youth back to the court, he said, "Peacock of the age, my son has carried out long and difficult journeys, and at the same time to his knowledge of exercises, he has added a complete familiarity with the classics of the people of the path. Pray have him examined, so that it may be shown that he could be an adornment of your Majesty's court." "Let him," said Mahmud immediately, "let him return after another year." During the next 12 months, Haydar Ali crossed the Oxus and visited Bokhara and Samarkand, Kasr, Yarafin and Tashkent, Dushanbe and the turbats of the Sufi saints of Turkestan. When he returned to the court, Mahmud of Ghazna took one look at him and said, "He may care to come back after a further year." Haydar Ali made the pilgrimage to Mecca in that year. He travelled to India, and in Persia he consulted rare books and never missed an opportunity of seeking out and paying his respects to the great dervishes of the time. And when he returned to Ghazna, Mahmud said to him, "Now select a teacher, if he will have you, and come back in a year." When that year was over, and Iskandar Khan prepared to take his son to the court, Haydar Ali showed no interest at all in going there. He simply sat at the feet of his teacher in Herat, and nothing that his father could say would move him. I have wasted my time and my money, and this young man has failed the tests imposed by Mahmud the king," lamented Iskandar. And he abandoned the whole affair. Meanwhile, the day when the youth was due to present himself came and went, and then Mahmud said to his courtiers, "Prepare yourselves for a visit to Herat, for there is someone there whom I have to see." As the emperor's cavalcade was entering Herat to the flourish of trumpets, Haddad Ali's teacher took him by the hand. He led him to the gate of the Tekya, and there they waited. Shortly afterwards, Mahmud and his courtier Ayaz, taking off their shoes, presented themselves at the sanctuary. "Here, Mahmud," said the Sufi sheikh, "is the man who was nothing while he was a visitor of kings, but who is now one who is visited by kings. Take him as your Sufi counselor, for he is ready." This is the story of the studies of Hiravi, Haidar Ali Jan, the sage of Herat.
Paradise of Song. Ahangar was a mighty swordsmith who lived in one of Afghanistan's remote eastern valleys. In time of peace, he made steel ploughs, shoed horses, and, above all, he sang. The songs of Ahangar, who was known by different names in various parts of Central Asia, were eagerly listened to by the people of the valleys. They came from the forests of giant walnut trees, from the snow-capped Hindu Kush, from Katagan and Balakshan, from Kanabad and Kunar, from Herat and Pagman, to hear his songs. Above all, the people came to hear the song of all songs, which was Ahangar's Song of the Valley of Paradise. This song had a haunting quality and a strange lilt, and most of all it had a story which was so strange that people felt they knew the remote Valley of Paradise of which the smith sang. Often they asked him to sing it when he was not in the mood to do so, and he would refuse. Sometimes people asked him whether the valley was truly real, and Ahangar could only say, "The valley of the song is as real can be." "But how do you know?" the people would ask. "Have you ever been there?" "Not in any ordinary way," said Ahangar. But to Ahangar and to nearly all the people who heard him, the valley of the song was real as real can be. Aisha, a local maiden whom he loved, doubted whether there was such a place. So too did Hassan, a braggart and fearsome swordsman who swore to marry Aisha and lost no opportunity of laughing at the smith. One day, when the villagers were sitting around silently, after Ahangar had been telling his tale to them, Hassan spoke. "If you believe that this valley is so real, and that it is, as you say, in those mountains of Sangan yonder, where the blue haze rises, why do you not try to find it?" "It would not be right, I know that," said Ahangar. "You know what it is convenient to know, and do not know what you do not want to know," shouted Hassan. "Now, my friend, I propose a test. You love Aisha, but she does not trust you. She has no faith in this absurd valley of yours. You could never marry her, because when there is no confidence between man and wife, they are not happy, and all manner of evils result." "Do you expect me to go to the valley, then?" asked Ahangar. "Yes," said Hassan and all the audience together. "If I go and return safely, will Aisha consent to marry me?" asked Ahangar. "Yes," murmured Aisha. So, collecting some dried mulberries and a scrap of bread, Ahangar set off for the distant mountains. He climbed and he climbed until he came to a wall which encircled the entire range. When he had ascended its sheer sides, there was another wall, even more precipitous than the first. After that there was a third, then a fourth, and finally a fifth wall. Descending on the other side, Ahangar found that he was in a valley strikingly similar to his own. People came out to welcome him, and as he saw them, Ahangar realized that something very strange was happening. Months later, Ahangar the smith, walking like an old man, limped into his native village and made for his humble hut. As the word of his return spread throughout the countryside, people gathered in front of his home to hear what his adventures had been. Hassan, the swordsman, spoke for them all and called Ahangar to his window. There was a gasp as everyone saw how old he had become. "Well, Master Ahangar, and did you reach the Valley of Paradise?" "I did." "And what was it like?" Ahangar, fumbling for his words, looked at the assembled people with a weariness and hopelessness that he had never felt before. He said, "I climbed, and I climbed, and I climbed. When it seemed as though there could be no human habitation in such a desolate place, and after many trials and disappointments, I came upon a valley. This valley was exactly like the one in which we live. And then I saw the people. Those people are not only like us people, they are the same people. For every Hassan, every Aisha, every Ahangar, every anybody whom we have here, there is another one, exactly the same in that valley. These are likenesses and reflections to us when we see such things, but it is we who are the likeness and reflection of them. We who are here, we are their twins." Everyone thought that Ahangar had gone mad through his privations, and Aisha married Hassan the swordsman. Ahangar rapidly grew old and died, and all the people, everyone who had first heard this story from the lips of Ahangar, first lost heart in their lives, then also grew old and died, for they felt that something was going to happen, over which they had no control, and from which they had no hope, and so they lost interest in life itself. It is only once in 1,000 years that this secret is seen by man. When he sees it, he is changed. When he tells its bare facts to others, they wither and die out. People think that such an event is a catastrophe, and so they must not know about it, for they cannot understand, such is the nature of their ordinary life, that they have more selves than one, more hopes than one, more chances than one, up there in the paradise of the song of Ahangar, the mighty smith.
Hope. There was once a king, descended from a long and powerful line, whom adversity had driven from his position, and who was in flight before his enemies. The king was soaked to the skin by rain, and in the middle of a desolate moor came across a small hut used by shepherds. He thought he'd rest there for a little, and when he went inside, he found that there were 2 shepherds already there, wrapped in blankets against the cold. They welcomed him kindly, and shared their only food, some cheese and some onions, with him. The king said, "One day, when I am restored to sovereignty, I shall repay you in the coin of the king." Now, although both shepherds had offered the king food, and were therefore equally generous, they were not both possessed of equal qualities in every way. The first shepherd, therefore, strutted about, telling everyone that he was better even than a nobleman, for he had given food to a king when there was nobody else to do so. But the second shepherd, on reflection, said to himself, "My being in the hut and my having some food with me were accidents. My offering food to the king was quite a normal action. But the king, with truly royal generosity, chose to interpret these facts as the result of merit. Now, it is for me to be inspired by this example, and to make myself truly worthy of such high-mindedness." 2 or 3 years later, the king returned to his rightful power, and he sent for both shepherds. Each of them was given rich gifts, and both obtained powerful positions at court. But the first shepherd, not having exerted any efforts to improve and prepare himself, soon fell a victim to an intrigue and was put to death for plotting. The second shepherd, on the other hand, worked so well that when the king reached a great age, he was nominated and accepted as his successor.
The Mad King's Idol. There was once a violent, ignorant, and idolatrous king. One day he swore that if his personal idol accorded him a certain advantage in life, he would capture the first 3 people who passed by his castle and force them to dedicate themselves to idol worship. Sure enough, the king's wish was fulfilled, and he immediately sent soldiers onto the highway to bring in the first 3 people whom they could find. These 3 were, as it happened, a scholar, a Sayyid, that is, a descendant of Muhammad the Prophet, and a prostitute. Having them thrown down before his idol, the unbalanced king told them of his vow and ordered them all to bow down in front of the image. The scholar said, "This situation undoubtedly comes within the doctrine of force majeure. There are numerous precedents allowing anyone to appear to conform with custom if compelled, without real legal or moral culpability being in any way involved." So he made a deep obeisance to the idol. The Sayyid, when it was his turn, said, "As a specially protected person, having in my veins the blood of the Holy Prophet, my actions themselves purify anything which is done, and therefore there is no bar to my acting as this man demands." And he bowed down before the idol. The prostitute said, "Alas, I have neither intellectual training nor special prerogatives, and so I am afraid that whatever you do to me, I cannot worship this idol, even in appearance." The Mad King's malady was immediately banished by this remark. As if by magic, he saw the deceit of the 2 worshippers of the image. He at once had the scholar and the Sayyid decapitated and set the prostitute free.
The Glance of Power. A dervish who had studied at the feet of a great Sufi teacher was told to perfect his knowledge of the sensing exercise, and then to return to his master for further instruction. He retired to a forest and concentrated upon inner meditations with great force and application until hardly anything could disturb him. He had, however, not concentrated well enough upon the need to keep all his objectives equally in his heart, and his zeal to succeed in his exercise proved somewhat stronger than his resolve to return to the school from which he had been sent to meditate. Thus it was that one day, while he was concentrating upon his inner self, a slight sound caught his ear. Annoyed at this, the dervish looked upwards into the branches of a tree from which the sound seemed to come, and saw a bird. The thought crossed his mind that this bird had no right to interrupt the exercises of so dedicated a man. No sooner had he conceived this idea than the bird dropped dead at his feet. Now the dervish was not sufficiently advanced in the path of Sufihood to realize that there are tests all the way along the road. All that he could see at that moment was that he had attained a power such as he had never had before. He could kill a living thing, or it might even be that the bird had been killed by some force other than one within himself, and all because it had interrupted his devotions. "I must indeed be a great Sufi," thought the dervish. He got up and started to walk towards the nearest town. When he got there, he saw an elegant house and decided to ask there for something to eat. When the door was opened by a woman at his knock, the dervish said, "Woman, bring me food, for I am an advanced dervish, and there is merit in feeding those who are on the path." "As soon as I can, revered sage," answered the lady, and she disappeared within. But quite a long time passed, and still the woman did not come back. With each moment that passed, the dervish became more and more impatient. When the woman returned, he said to her, "Consider yourself lucky that I do not direct upon you the wrath of the dervish, for does not everyone know that ill fortune can come through disobedience of the elect? Ill fortune can indeed come, unless one is able to resist it through some experiences of one's own, said the woman. How dare you answer me like that? The dervish shouted. And what, in any case, do you mean? I only mean, said the woman, that I am not a bird in a forest clearing. At these words the dervish was astounded. My wrath is not harming you, and you can even read my thoughts, he spluttered, and he begged the woman to become his teacher. If you have disobeyed your own original teacher, you will fail me, too, said the woman. Well, at least tell me how you reached a stage of understanding so much greater than mine, asked the dervish. By obeying my teacher, she replied. He told me to attend his lectures and his exercises when he called me, and that otherwise I was to regard my worldly tasks as my exercises. In this way, though I have not heard from him for years, my inner life has constantly expanded, giving me such powers as you have seen, and many others. The dervish returned to the tekyah of his teacher for further guidance. The master refused to allow him to discuss anything, but merely said when he appeared, Go and serve under a certain scavenger who cleans the streets in such and such a town. Because the dervish held his teacher in such high regard, he went to that town. But when he arrived at the place where the scavenger worked, and saw him standing there covered in filth, he recoiled from approaching him, and could not imagine himself as his servant. As he stood there irresolutely, the scavenger said, calling him by his name, Lajaward, what bird would you kill today? Lajaward, what woman may read your thoughts today? Lajaward, what revolting duty will your teacher impose upon you tomorrow? Lajaward asked him, How can you see into my mind? How can a scavenger do things which pious hermits cannot do? Who are you? And the scavenger said, Some pious hermits can do these things, but they do not do them for you, because they have other things to do. To you I look like a scavenger because that is my occupation. Because you do not like the work, you do not like the man. Because you imagine that holiness is washing and squatting and meditation, you will never find it. I have attained my present capacities because I never thought about holiness. I thought about duty. When people teach you duty to a master or duty to something sacred, they are teaching you duty, you fool. All you can see is the duty to man or duty to the temple. Because you cannot concentrate upon duty, you are as good as lost. And Lajaward, when he was able to forget that he was the servant of a scavenger and realized that being a servant was a duty, became the man we know as the enlightened, the miracle-working, the rarely perfumed Sheikh Abdurrazzaq Lajawardi Badakhshan.
The baby elephant. Once upon a time, there was a baby elephant who heard someone say, Look, there is a mouse. The person who said it was looking at a mouse, but the elephant thought that he was referring to him. Now, there were very few mice in that country, and in any case they tended to stay in their holes, and their voices were not very loud. But the baby elephant thundered around, ecstatic at his discovery. I am a mouse! He said it so loudly and so often and to so many people that, believe it or not, there is now an entire country where almost everyone believes that elephants, and particularly baby elephants, are mice. It is true that from time to time mice have tried to remonstrate with those who hold the majority belief, but they have always been put to flight. And if anyone ever wants to reopen the question of mice and elephants in those parts, he had better have a good reason strong nerves, and an effective means of putting his case.
The Secret of the Locked Room. Ayaz was the boon companion and slave of the great conqueror Mahmud the Idolbreaker, monarch of Ghazna. He had first come to the court as a beggarly slave, and Mahmud had made him his adviser and friend. The other courtiers were jealous of Ayaz and observed his every movement, intending to denounce him for some shortcoming, thus encompassing his downfall. One day these jealous ones went to Mahmud and said, "Shadow of Allah upon earth, know that, indefatigable as always in your service, we have been keeping your slave Ayaz under close scrutiny. We have now to report that every day, as soon as he leaves the court, Ayaz goes into a small room where nobody else is ever allowed. He spends some time there and then goes to his own quarters. We fear that this habit of his may be connected with a guilty secret. Perhaps he consorts with plotters even, who have designs upon your Majesty's life." For a long time Mahmud refused to hear anything against Ayaz. But the mystery of the locked room preyed upon his mind until he felt that he had to question Ayaz. One day, when Ayaz was coming out of his private chamber, Mahmud, surrounded by courtiers, appeared and demanded to be shown into the room. "No," said Ayaz. "If you do not allow me to enter the room, all my confidence in you as trustworthy and loyal will have evaporated, and we can never thenceforward be on the same terms. Take your choice," said the fierce conqueror. Ayaz wept, and then he threw open the door of the room and allowed Mahmud and his staff to enter. The room was empty of all furniture. All that it contained was a hook in the wall, and on the hook hung a tattered and patched cloak, a staff, and a begging bowl. The king and his court were unable to understand the significance of this discovery. Mahmud demanded an explanation, and Ayaz said, "Mahmud, for years I have been your slave, your friend and counselor. I have tried never to forget my origins, and for this reason I have come here every day to remind myself of what I was. I belong to you, and all that belongs to me is my rags, my stick, my bowl, and my wandering over the face of the earth."
The Miracle of the Royal Dervish. It is related that the Sufi master Ibrahim ben Adam was sitting one day in a forest clearing when two wandering dervishes approached him. He made them welcome, and they talked of spiritual matters until it was dusk. As soon as night fell, Ibrahim invited the travellers to be his guests at a meal. Immediately they accepted. A table laid with the finest foods appeared before their eyes. "How long have you been a dervish?" one of them asked Ibrahim. 2 years, he said. "I have been following the Sufi path for nearly 3 decades, and no such capacity as you have shown us has ever manifested itself to me," said the man. Ibrahim said nothing. When the food was almost finished, a stranger in a green robe entered the glade. He sat down and shared some of the food. All realized by an inner sense that this was Hadean, the immortal guide of all the Sufis. They waited for him to impart some wisdom to them. But when he stood up to leave, Hadean simply said, "You 2 dervishes wonder about Ibrahim. But what have you renounced in order to follow the dervish path? You have given up the expectations of security and an ordinary life. Ibrahim ben Adam was a mighty king and threw away the sovereignty of the Sultanate of Balkh to become a Sufi. This is why he is far ahead of you. During your 30 years, too, you have gained satisfactions through renunciation itself. This has been your payment." he has always abstained from claiming any payment for his sacrifice. And next moment, Khidr was gone.
Khalidi and the Gold Pieces. The Sufi teacher Khalidi found that many of his disciples spent much of their time spreading stories of his amazing virtues, as well as his uncanny power of anticipating the thoughts and instructional needs of his pupils. He reproached them for this time and again, but the human tendency to boast about someone whom one serves or admires was too strong for them. One day he said, "Unless you stop this practice, which not only keeps me surrounded by sightseers, but prevents me from imparting further significant knowledge to you, I will have to make an example which will cause you to dislike me. It could make you a laughingstock for having followed me." Since this warning did not have the desired effect, Khalidi soon afterwards, in the presence of numerous disciples and members of the public, gave 100 pieces of gold to a passing beggar. Shortly afterwards, the beggar came back with the gold, saying, "This gold's done me no good. My wife now says that she should have half of it, or else that she should have an equal amount from you, since she's just as poor as I am." Khalidi took the gold and handed it to a rich man who was present, saying, "Rich men don't complain of their money." He said to the beggar, "Now you are restored to your former state. Take up your normal, harmonious relationship with your wife." Turning to his disciples, he said, "You see, Khalidi makes mistakes, and the world has seen it as well."